In the dark of night, a team of divers prepares for a dangerous expedition. Their journey will take them 60 miles offshore and a half-century back in time.
In the shadowy depths of the Atlantic, where sunlight fades and silence reigns, a team of divers embarks on a perilous descent. Their mission? To explore a forgotten relic of war. A sunken vessel cloaked in mystery and lost to time. But as they penetrated the cold, corroded hull, what they uncover defies all expectations. Long-buried secrets rise to the surface, challenging history and raising questions no one thought to ask. What lies within this underwater tomb, and why has its story been erased? Prepare to journey into the unknown, where every revelation leads to deeper intrigue. U-869 was one of Nazi Germany's long-range, deep-diving war machines, built to be a terror beneath the waves. We're talking nearly 250 feet of a formidable underwater war machine, 6 torpedo tubes, and a captain with nerves of steel. Launched in 1943, U-869 was part of the infamous Type C-40 class, which was basically the luxury sedans of death-dealing U-boats. It was bigger, badder, and designed to sneak into enemy waters and cause havoc without ever being seen. So, where did this piece of Nazi engineering go? Hold on to that thought, because things are about to get deep, and what those divers eventually found inside the ship. Let's just say history got a rewrite, and not the kind they teach you in school. The disappearance that made no sense, U-869's vanishing act. According to wartime documents, U-869 was assigned to patrol the waters near the Strait of Gibraltar, a tricky, narrow spot where Allied ships often ended up bumping into each other. Their mission was to intercept, disrupt, and vanish, except things went off the rails and definitely not as planned. In February of 1945, a United States Coast Guard cutter reported a sunken German sub near Gibraltar. The Allies dusted off their hands and gave themselves a pat on the back for taking another Nazi U-boat down. They chalked this submarine to be the U-869, tossed it in the file, and called it a day. However, that wasn't U-869, and for decades, no one questioned the report. Not the United States Navy, not the historians, and not even the families of the 56 German sailors who supposedly went down with the boat. It was just another lost story in the pages of World War II, another line on the list of the dead. There were no confirmed sonar hits, no wreckage, no photos, just wartime paperwork. And if you've ever read war reports from back then, you know accuracy is not their strong suit, especially when the Atlantic is a literal war zone, and people are guessing coordinates while dodging torpedoes. Officials declared the U-869 case closed, but the real U-869 had been rerouted and never got the memo. What really happened will shock you. U-869's final mission was marked by confusion and miscommunication. Initially, on December 29, 1944, U-Boat Command ordered U-869 to patrol waters off the New Jersey coast. However, due to concerns about fuel limitations, this order was later rescinded, and U-869 was instructed to shift its patrol area to the west of Gibraltar, excluding the strait itself. Despite multiple attempts, U-869 did not acknowledge these updated orders, and the last communication from the submarine was on January 10, 1945, reporting its fuel supply but not its position or acknowledgement of the new patrol area. As a result, German command presumed U-869 was operating near Gibraltar and, upon its disappearance, assumed it was lost there. For the next 40 years, U-869 was nothing but a ghost ship, a whisper in old documents. Families of the lost crew had no graves, no wreck to mourn, just a name on a memorial and a whole lot of unanswered questions. Even military historians couldn't agree. Some stuck to the Gibraltar story, while others started digging and what they found decades later off the coast of New Jersey would blow the lid off the whole thing. So how did one of Hitler's deadliest machines vanish without a trace, only to be found exactly where no one was looking? The Jersey discovery that shook history. Let's rewind to the summer of 1991. The weather is hot, classic rock on the radio, and somewhere off the coast of Point Pleasant, New Jersey, a group of weekend thrill-seekers was about to stumble on something that would flip decades of military history upside down. They were a bunch of dedicated wreck divers, guys who treated deep-sea exploration the way some people treat fantasy football. John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, two of the most respected and, dare I say, reckless wreck divers on the East Coast scene. They weren't your average beach bums. These guys were technical divers, which basically means they voluntarily swam into pitch-black, freezing death traps hundreds of feet below the ocean's surface just for fun. That summer, their goal was to explore uncharted wrecks scattered along the seafloor, armed with nothing but sonar, grit, and some highly questionable life insurance. Now, you have to understand that the waters off Jersey are like an underwater junkyard. There, you would find shipwrecks from wars, storms, and shipping disasters scattered all over the ocean floor, just sitting there like forgotten metal ghosts. When their sonar picked up a long, sleek blip about 60 miles offshore, at a depth of 230 feet, it wasn't exactly shocking. However, it was unusual. The image that popped up looked suspiciously like a submarine, and not a fishing boat. Their first dive down to the wreck was a mess. The current was too strong, their visibility was poor, and everything down there felt wrong. It was cold, pitch dark, and the structure they'd found was twisted and covered in fishing nets. Imagine crawling through a haunted metal cave where you can only see 3 feet in front of you, and where every step forward could mean disaster. That is what the dive felt like. But they knew immediately that this wasn't just any wreck. This was something big. Here's where things start to get interesting, though. When John Chatterton and Richie Kohler returned to the surface and started doing their research, all the historical records told them the same thing. There was no German U-boat lost anywhere near that location. According to Allied records, the last known position of U-boat activity during that phase of the war was all the way across the Atlantic, near the Strait of Gibraltar, which was thousands of miles from the Jersey coast. So what exactly were they looking at? To make things even sketchier, there were 0 markings on the wreck. No hull number, no nameplate, nothing that gave it up that it was a German submarine that had been there since 1945. Just twisted steel, sealed hatches, and the echo of something long forgotten. Chatterton and Kohler were in too deep at this point, literally and figuratively, because they had just found a ghost sub that officially did not exist. They nicknamed it U-Who, and it became an obsession. For years, they returned to the site, diving again and again under brutally dangerous conditions, and this was not your average scuba situation. These dives involved mixed gases, meticulous decompression schedules, and the constant danger from the bends, hypoxia, or getting trapped in twisted, rusted steel. These dives were calculated risks every single time. Slowly but surely, the wreck began to reveal its secrets, starting with gauges labeled in German, then dials in metric, compartments eerily intact, and then came the game changer. A simple, tarnished butter knife with the name Horenberg engraved on it. This was when they really kicked into overdrive. With help from naval archives and historians, they traced the name back to Georg Horenberg, a real crew member from the U-869. They had proved the sub was U-869, but that answer only raised more chilling questions. Why was it here? What sank it? And why had no one been looking in the right place? The knife, the name, and the man who lived For years, Richie Kohler and John Chatterton had been obsessed with the identity of the wreck they'd found off the coast of New Jersey, and while they had suspicions of it being a German U-boat, there were no official records that stated a U-boat ever went down that area. That was until they discovered the butter knife with a name engraved on it. So now, with one butter knife, they had their first tangible clue tying this ghost sub to a real name, and that led them to start cross-referencing more data. They looked at the Deskemag AG Weser shipyard records, the German company that built U-869, and began matching the serial numbers until they found the sub's engine parts with the manufacturer's documents. Every piece that came up confirmed it. This wreck, the one no one could identify for years, was, without a doubt, the lost U-869, which had gone missing with 56 crew members on board. As the divers were putting the final pieces together, trying to build the full picture of what had happened to the U-boat and its 56 crewmen, they stumbled across something even more shocking. There was one crew member who was supposed to be on board, but wasn't. His name was Herbert Gushevsky, and he had been assigned to U-869 during its final weeks before deployment. He trained with the crew, shared quarters, and memorized the same escape drills. But shortly before the submarine was set to leave port, Herbert came down with a serious illness. That random twist of fate had saved his life. Now, decades later, living a quiet life in Germany, Herbert had no reason to believe his old submarine had ended up anywhere other than the Mediterranean. He, like everyone else, believed the official story, but then Kohler and Chatterton came calling. They reached out to Herbert as part of their research, not even sure if he was still alive. When they found him, Herbert was in disbelief. Everything he'd been told for over 50 years contradicted that, but they showed him photos, items from the wreck, engine parts, and most importantly, the butter knife. The one with Horenberg etched into it, a crewmate he'd known, trained with, and assumed had died somewhere far away in southern Europe. Following this, Herbert confirmed that was the Horenberg he'd served with. He remembered him clearly. That little knife, forgotten in the wreck for half a century, carried with it more proof than any document. And Herbert, now an old man, sat with the realization that he had narrowly escaped a watery grave, and that his friends had died somewhere no one had even thought to look. He didn't give interviews, neither did he chase headlines. However, he did stay in touch with the divers, quietly working behind the scenes to help identify other crew members and verify the U-boat's origin from the German side. His memory, his insight, added something no database ever could. Herbert passed away in 2005, never having seen the sealed compartments that would later be uncovered in the sub. Or maybe he knew about them all along and just never said a word. That one thing we'll never know for sure. But what we do know is all it took was a butter knife to unravel one of the greatest underwater mysteries of the 20th century. A simple artifact turned into a key that opened up decades of hidden history, pulled from the depths by two divers who refused to give up. Yes, a butter knife led to the truth, but what lay sealed behind the sub's corroded doors would reveal far more. Inside the ghost submarine, a time capsule of war. When John Chatterton, Richie Kohler, and their crew finally started getting deeper into the wreck of U-869, they weren't just diving into metal, they were diving into memories. The inside of the sub was like walking through a cramped, corroded tomb. Metal walls that had once echoed with laughter, arguments, boots clanging across grates were now still, silent, cold, but disturbingly well-preserved. Let's start with the crew quarters. The divers found bunks stacked like sardines, barely big enough for a grown man to crawl into. Some of them still had rotting bedrolls in place. A few had books nearby, their pages warped from decades underwater, but still legible enough to read. Then came the mess hall, or what was left of it. There were plates still on the table, utensils scattered, and one eerily preserved ration tin that looked like someone had just stepped out for a smoke break, except no one ever came back. The air inside felt thick with something unspoken, a kind of emotional residue. These weren't Nazi officers from a history book anymore, they were people. Some 19-year-olds, others 22-year-olds. They were guys trying to kill time between patrols, probably arguing over food or joking about their superiors. According to speculations, in one corner of the wreck, the divers found a locker that had popped open, its contents still floating nearby. Inside were a pair of leather gloves, a rusted harmonica, and a deck of playing cards sealed in plastic. In the middle of a war, beneath crushing pressure, surrounded by torpedoes and death, someone had taken the time to bring music. It was a punch to the gut, proof that life aboard U-869 wasn't just mechanical, but it was human. The control room was a twisted steel cage of buttons, levers, and broken glass. Most of the gauges had shattered under the pressure, but some still clung stubbornly to the walls. There were German labels, metric numbers, and it was like being inside a control panel designed for wartime operations. You could almost picture the crew standing there, fingers flying over switches as orders barked down the narrow halls. One of the most disturbing areas was the torpedo room. The divers discovered that several of the torpedo tubes were still sealed, which raised even more questions. If they'd been attacked, why hadn't they fired? If it was an accident, what actually went wrong? The torpedoes themselves were long gone, some inaccessible, but and all around the submarine were these eerie signs of everyday life. The things no history book bothers to mention. Boots still lined up against a wall, shaving kits, a rusted toothbrush, and a cracked mirror that still caught the beam of the diver's torch. A man probably looked at himself in that mirror the morning the submarine went down. He probably fixed his collar, smoothed his hair, and thought about home. That was the part that haunted the divers more than anything. The intimacy of it. What shocked everyone was just how much had been preserved. The Atlantic Ocean, as brutal as it is, had kept the wreck sealed like a time capsule. The low oxygen, the cold water, the lack of light, it all created a perfect environment to protect what should have disintegrated decades ago. Rubber seals still clung to locker doors. Paper documents, though fragile, were still there. Even some clothing like uniforms with Nazi insignias and name patches remained intact. It's hard to reconcile those symbols with the personal items nearby. It made everything real, not in a political sense, but in a painfully human one. These weren't characters in a textbook. They were scared young men shoved into a steel tube and told to fight for a crumbling empire. Some of them probably believed in the cause. Some didn't, but in the end, it didn't matter. The ocean didn't care what side you were on. It took them all the same. U-869 wasn't just a submarine anymore. It was a memorial, one that had been waiting, buried beneath the waves, for someone to come looking, and thanks to those divers, the voices inside finally got heard. Personal items, sealed torpedo tubes, and a mirror that may have reflected someone's final glance. Something went terribly wrong aboard U-869, but what if the true threat came from inside? Who really sank U-869? The theories, the drama, the debate. Let's start with the most spine-chilling theory. U-869 sank itself, but not sabotage or desertion. We're talking about one of the worst nightmares any submarine crew could imagine. A circle runner. If you're not familiar with what a circle runner is, it basically refers to a malfunctioning torpedo that, instead of traveling straight toward its target, veers into a circular path, potentially endangering the vessel that launched it. You fire a torpedo, it takes a wild turn, and a few seconds later, it's your own coffin it cracks open. This occurrence was a known issue during World War II, affecting torpedoes from various navies, including those of Germany and the United States. Several U-boats were lost to their own weapons, which is the ultimate example of friendly fire gone wrong. Supporters of this theory believe U-869 launched a test torpedo, or maybe even attempted an attack, but the torpedo's guidance system malfunctioned, made a wide loop, and smacked the submarine hard before anyone had time to react. The damage seen on U-869's hull seems to back this up, an explosion that caused internal destruction more than external. The blast appears to have come from within, pushing metal inward and crumpling compartments like a soda can stepped on by a giant. Here's the thing, though. While that theory is terrifying and totally plausible, it's not the only story being passed around the underwater gossip mill. Another theory, backed by the United States Navy records, says that U-869 was destroyed in combat by American destroyers. According to this version, two United States ships, the USS Howard D. Crowe and the USS Coiner, made contact with a U-boat on February 11, 1945, somewhere off the East Coast. They supposedly picked up acoustic signals, identified them as a submarine, and then launched a coordinated depth charge attack. After the war, when military reports were being cleaned up and sorted like receipts after tax season, that U-boat kill was officially credited as the destruction of U-869. Naturally, that should have been the end of the story, except the wreck didn't match the exact coordinates reported in those Navy logs. It was close, but not dead on, and the more the divers explored the wreck, the weirder things got. If U-869 was sunk by depth charges, then why were several of the torpedo tubes still sealed? Wouldn't a sub in active combat have fired at least one weapon, and if they had been caught off guard, wouldn't there be more signs of damage from above, not from the inside? That's where the water gets murky, pun absolutely intended, because yes, some parts of the submarine's outer hull showed warping that could be consistent with a pressure wave from a nearby depth charge, but the severity of the damage didn't quite match what you'd expect from a direct hit. Internally, the most damage seemed to stem from the forward compartments exactly where a rogue torpedo might have struck if it turned back on its sender. So now, we've got a tug of war. On one side, there's the self-inflicted explosion theory, on the other, the United States Navy's official version of events, and to be fair, both camps have receipts, but let's just say those receipts are stained, half-faded, and missing a few signatures. What really stirs the pot is the possibility that U-869 was operating under secret orders rerouted during the chaotic final months of the war. By 1945, German command was a total mess. Communications were sloppy, orders changed constantly, and a lot of logs were either lost, destroyed, or never written down properly. So, it's entirely possible U-869 was sent somewhere else, maybe even toward the United States, and no one ever recorded it. That theory would explain its weird location, the lack of defensive engagement, and even the confusion around who sunk it. Maybe the Navy did sink a U-boat on February 11th, just not this one. Then there's a darker theory, one with less documentation and more speculation, that suggests U-869 might have been on some kind of covert mission. Maybe transporting materials, maybe deploying operatives. No one knows for sure. But the secrecy around its discovery, the condition of the wreck, and the classified-like silence following the artifact recovery left a lot of people raising eyebrows. As for the consensus, it depends on who you ask. The United States Navy still stands by the destroyer theory. They've had it on record for decades and haven't budged, but divers, wreck historians, and many independent experts lean heavily toward the Circle Runner explanation. The internal damage, the sealed torpedo tubes, the lack of engagement evidence. It all adds up. Not perfectly, but closely enough to feel right. So who really sank U-869? Was it a fatal error from within, or a stealth kill from above? The truth might still be sitting there, rusting in silence. But one thing's for sure, this isn't just a story about a submarine. It's a story about uncertainty, about how even the coldest case can still burn with questions, and how sometimes not even the ocean can bury the truth for good. Two theories, missing records and whispers of a covert mission, yet no clear answer. But what if the wreck itself wasn't just evidence, but a message we were never meant to find? What the ocean remembered. The lessons of U-869. It's easy to think of World War II as something you only encounter in textbooks, documentaries, or old black-and-white newsreels. It's been nearly a century, and with so much distance between then and now, it's tempting to believe that all the big stories have already been told, that every mystery has been solved, every hero named, every battle documented down to the last bullet. But then, the discovery of U-869 didn't just rewrite a line in some dusty naval report. It challenged the idea that history is ever really complete, because here was this massive piece of war machinery, lost to time, sitting just a few hours from the Jersey shore, and no one, not the United States Navy, not German historians, not even the families of the crew, had any idea it was there. When we finally found it, it wasn't thanks to some government-sponsored expedition with a research grant and a battleship. It was two guys with a boat, a dream, and a dangerous obsession with the truth. That's what makes this story so remarkable. It wasn't about military power or historical prestige, it was about curiosity. Technology definitely helped. Thanks to the side-scan sonar, mixed gas diving, high-tech mapping software that played a huge role in locating and exploring the wreck, but tech is just a tool. It was human determination that made the discovery possible. It was people like John Chatterton and Richie Kohler spending hundreds of hours risking their lives just to answer the questions on what submarine it was and why it was there. When they finally figured out it was U-869, the story took on a whole new dimension, because this wasn't just about war anymore. It was 56 young men, barely out of boyhood, sealed in a steel tomb under the Atlantic for 5 decades. They had names, families, lives that didn't make it into the history books. The divers didn't just find a sub, they found them. Inside the wreck, everything was still there. The mess kits, the uniforms, the photos, a rusty harmonica. You could see the moments they lived in, frozen in time. It wasn't about the Nazi insignias or the war strategies anymore. It was about what it felt like to be human in the middle of something as massive and unforgiving as World War II. These were guys who probably wanted to go home just as badly as anyone on the other side of the war, and the ocean had held on to their story, just waiting for someone to finally come listen. That's what U-869 reminds us, that war is massive, messy, and so much more personal than we ever want to admit. It's not just tanks, maps, and generals. It's fear, boredom, laughter, and grief, all happening in the same moment, and every wreck sitting at the bottom of the sea isn't just a piece of history. It's a message in a bottle from someone who never got to finish their story. Modern technology lets us uncover more of these forgotten voices than ever before. With sonar that can map the ocean floor like Google Earth, and diving equipment that lets humans safely explore depths that used to be suicide zones, we now have the power to go back into the darkest corners of our past and pull the truth into the light. But with that power comes a responsibility to tell those stories the right way. Because let's be honest, the U-869 could have easily stayed lost forever. It's terrifying to think how many other submarines, ships, or even whole units from that war and others that are still sitting somewhere unknown, their stories buried under layers of silt and secrecy. With each one we find, we don't just add to history books, we make history more real, more human. That's why this story matters. Not because it's dramatic, though it is, but because it's a wake-up call. It reminds us that there are always more layers to the past, always more people who didn't get their story told. The discovery of U-869 didn't end with the identification of a submarine. It began a new chapter in how we think about World War II, about naval warfare, and about the lives caught in between. So when you hear about divers finding just an old wreck, remember that wreck might be the resting place of someone who never made it home, without their name ever making it into the world they left behind. Thanks to people like Chatterton and Kohler, and the technology that helped them along the way, we get to give those stories a second life. We get to remember the people who weren't generals, or leaders, or famous, just kids in uniforms who followed orders and vanished into the sea. The truth is, the ocean forgets nothing. It keeps every secret, every error, every heartbreak. But now, finally, we have the tools and the will to ask it for answers. And sometimes, it answers back. What do you think really happened to U-869? Was it taken down by its own weapon in a tragic twist of fate? Or did Allied forces strike a blow history simply misplaced? Should we keep searching for more wrecks like this, knowing the cost can be so high? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.